Something is happening. I don't know. I'm not into the Facebook. You can tell I'm trying to get in there, but it's too fast for me. So let's see if we can talk here, and let's try. If we have to send things and let's talk on Facebook, let's create a Facebook and then talk. If that's the only way we can talk, you can't raise questions. But let's find a way to come. Am I right? Let's find a way. Because we were in Swaziland. We had a program in Swaziland for young people, and then they said, you see that lady was choristering and leading in the worship thing. They said she committed suicide a week later after the program. And I feel bad, like we should have seen it. I feel bad. It's like, what is it that we couldn't do for that girl during that whole week? I feel awful. It's like we failed her. It's like she was there to get answers, but we couldn't. And she was dealing with something heavy in her heart. Now, what I want us to do this evening, as an example of what I'm trying to work out now in my life, that we try especially and deal with these issues, especially when we're dealing with non-religious communities. And let me talk about resurrection and how it fits in with the whole purpose of existence. You may still not agree with it, but I'm just going to approach resurrection as that which gives meaning and purpose to life. I fully believe that if there were no resurrection, as Paul says, this life would lose its meaning. But then, what is this thing about resurrection? Because we have been accused as forcing people to think about the hereafter and have no regard for the here and now. Sorry. Yo. Some of my friends don't go to church, ne? Can you answer him? This is Pastor Lefumi. Tell him I'm presenting him. Now that he's done, he thinks I'm done. All right. So let's look at. I'll tell you why I'm doing that. I want us to read a text together. You know what I'm going to do? We're just going to look at resurrection. I'm going to tell you why resurrection is so important. Do you mind if we do that? It's like it's a waste of time. What do you want us to talk about? You want your land? We can talk about that also if you want us to talk about that. Verse 58, 1 Corinthians 15. It says, yeah, therefore, it's a conclusion. And that whole chapter, the whole focus was on resurrection. So here's a conclusion of that chapter. It says, therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, be immovable. I like that. Just stop right there, put a comma there. Based on what Paul has shared with us, which is the theme of resurrection, he says, here's a conclusion. Therefore, because of what we have said, be steadfast, be immovable. What does it mean to be immovable? How do you know a person is immovable? How do you know that you are immovable? When there are things that are trying to move you and they fail to move you, then you are immovable. Like you can't move me. So when there are circumstances around you, when there are situations around you that are there to make you move, but you are immovable, you are steadfast, you're focusing, and whatever is going around you cannot remove you from that focus. You're steadfast, you're patient, and that word steadfast will also fit there. You're persevering, you are enduring, you are immovable. You have lost a girlfriend, you are immovable. You have been raped, you are immovable, because rape has not moved you. You have lost your father, you are immovable. You have lost your man, but you are immovable. Steadfast. You can bring whatever you want to bring, but then it finds you immovable. In psychology, they would use the word, not in psychology as such, but in those fields, they would use the word resilient. So you are resilient. Resilient means, it doesn't mean that nothing happens. It means it comes, but I'm resilient. It's a part of emotional intelligence, being resilient. immovable because it is very clear that for you to think that life will be what you want it to be, it's not going to happen. In a normal, you see, everybody wishes that we were in heaven, and yet most people don't believe in heaven. No one gets raped in heaven, but people get raped here. So which means here we must be able to deal with that. Nobody loses friends in heaven, but here we lose friends. So here we must know how to deal with the loss of friends. You cannot be in a situation where everything around you works the way you want it to work. You know that. You know that. You do not steal, but somebody's going to break into your car and steal. And you're going to be angry. You know why you're angry? Because you will never do that. But remember, this world is not full of you. It is not full of people like you. So don't go around and say, and I know you can say why, that's fine, but remember, there's no one who has a contract with you that I'm not going to steal from you. It's not like they've broken a vow. But somehow we've got this entitlement that people around me must protect me and make sure I'm in a safe environment. Your parents maybe have to do that. The government maybe has to do that. But even also the government may not always be where you are to protect you. At some point, beloved, you're going to be disappointed. But Paul says, if you understand what the resurrection is all about, you're going to be immovable. And I want to be immovable. I want to be immovable. You can sit there crossing your fingers. They'll break because things happen. So he says, as he finishes that text, and he says, immovable. When he says immovable, don't just sit there, I'm immovable. I'm immovable. That's boring. He says, always abounding in the work of the Lord. In other words, living life, being an impactful life, a life of blessing others. So you are immovable, but not just this hermit that stays somewhere there that does not touch by whatever that's happening around. Immovable, but living life abundantly and abounding in the work of the Lord. In other words, living out and being a blessing to others. And then he says, knowing that your labor is not in vain. So in other words, he says, what you are doing is not a waste of time in the Lord. It's not. Why is it not a waste of time? Because of resurrection. Have you ever felt like, what's the point? I mean, honestly, what's the point? You try to help a guy, you pick up a guy that was hungry and poor and whatever. You try and say, look, I'm going to take him to school, I'm touched, I'm going to this. And then you bring him there, he's like there with you for a month or two. The next day he's gone, he's cleaned the whole house. And then you sit there crying because he's stolen everything. You say, me, I'm sick and tired, I'm not helping anyone. What's the point? And this text says, be immovable. Continue abounding in the work of the Lord. Because what you are doing for the Lord is not in vain. And he's raising that argument from the point of resurrection. Resurrection. You can do that. Now I'm going to do that with you. We're going to reflect on that chapter. But before I do that, let's admit that we are faced with this whole idea of meaninglessness. With my friends here, the students. Let me just read a quotation. There's a book here, Ends and Means, by I think it's Thomas Huxley. He says, listen to this, I had a motive for not wanting the world to have a meaning. You following that? Because I'm not projecting. Consequently, I assumed that and was able without difficulty to find satisfying reasons for this assumption that the world has no meaning. And it actually says, before I found that there was no meaning, I wanted a world that has no meaning. And then I looked out for reasons And I found those reasons that convinced me that this world has no meaning. But here's a very confession, and you don't find many people who make that confession. He says, I found those reasons because I was looking for them. Because I had this motive that the world cannot have meaning. Then I looked for reasons. And I tell you, this is how people do research these days, especially on issues that touch on their existence. They start off with a motive and they go prove that motive. You start off by saying, there cannot be God. God cannot exist. And then you go look for reasons why it doesn't exist. You don't start off and saying, he could exist. Let's see what the facts and the data will give to me. You are going to be selecting all the data and facts that will actually prove and affirm your assumption that you began with. That's wrong research. You know it. If you're going to do research, you have to be open. You cannot. We've found it. We've discovered, even with all issues affecting issues on LGBT, issues on feminism, people who do research there are usually doing research with an assumption, with a motive that this is what I want to find. Though I'm going to look for research to affirm this. But they don't allow the facts to actually challenge even their assumptions. I'm not going to get into those things. Then this is what she says, Huxley. For myself, now I jump a big paragraph there. For myself, the philosophy of meaninglessness was essentially an instrument of liberation. And that liberation is both sexual and political. In other words, he says, I would be disappointed to discover, to be convinced that the world has meaning, because if the world has meaning, I cannot live as I please. I don't want that. I don't want a world that has a meaning to a point where I've got to align my activities and my life to that meaning. I don't want a world with a meaning, because sexual, I'm not going to be free. Now, if the world has no meaning, I can do as I please. You know the Belshazzar syndrome we spoke about the other day, wives and concubines and big parties and celebrating, because I don't want a God who defines what meaning is supposed to be. All right? I like that. To me, it opens up all kinds of things, and then I can be able to read and understand why people think the way they do. But sometimes there are things that make people to lose hope and believe that there's no philosophical. Sometimes it's existential. It's an experience that happens. For example, some of you would know that Darwin, it was the loss of his daughter Annie that made Darwin to actually be propelled in that trajectory that landed him to a point where Darwinism was the explanation of life. You see, Darwin comes from a religious family, from a religious background. Now he later on known as the one of those who propelled this Darwinist, naturalist, scientific way of life, philosophy or whatever worldview. But very few of us realize that Darwin had to deal with the loss of his child, Annie, at the age of around 10 and 11. And that loss left him empty. It challenged every religious assumption he had. And he ended up saying, there cannot be God. Let's look for the fact that there is no God. So in all his research, he is trying to find something that is going to affirm his assumption. But there's somebody who, there are many, of course, one that I think about now, he actually went into the whole Darwinistic context and did that and looked at everything. Actually, Darwin himself would not be happy with the results because they don't answer what he started to do. But because of whatever issues he had to push even those answers towards that direction. And I hope what I'm saying makes sense. So in his biography, this is Darwin now. In the biography entitled Life of a Tormented Evolutionist. Life of a Tormented Evolutionist. And then we read that Annie's cruel death destroyed Charles Darwin's tatters of beliefs in a moral and just universe. There is no moral and just universe. We just here like animals. We came, we are here, we will die. Nothing. Later he would say, Darwin himself, that his period, this period in his life of losing his child, chimed the final death knell for his Christianity. You know what that means? It's like it rang the final bell, like a gong. That was the last one. That was the end. As far as Christianity is concerned, that was the end. He couldn't deal with that anymore. But there's another Charles Templeton. Charles Templeton, I don't know how many of you know Charles Templeton. There's a book he wrote in 1991, My Reasons for Rejecting Christian Faith. And that book is called Farewell to God. And then Farewell to God, My Reasons for Rejecting Christian Faith. You know Charles Templeton and the popular, is late now, evangelist, American evangelist, what's his name, the revivalist, the Billy Graham. Do you know that Charles Templeton would fill up halls that Billy Graham could not fill? He, at his time, he was in that league of Billy Graham, if not more. But in 1991 he wrote that book, Farewell to God. It shook the world. People started writing and saying, what's wrong with him? It shook the whole evangelical world. And this is what he says in his book. He says, I don't see any God of love. All I see are children suffering and dying. I see people killing and stealing. Disease and death are everywhere. If your God does exist, he must be a sadistic ogre. He loves seeing people die. I don't need that God. So people kill God because God cannot prevent killing. So they kill him. So we don't need you. In other words, here's the thing. If I see suffering around me and you say there's God, then your God enjoys that suffering and that killing. Therefore, I don't believe in that God, which is fair. But to say he doesn't exist, then it's going a step further. Because now you are saying you do away with a God who does not agree with how to deal with moral issues. You do away with him. But you can't do away with him. You can just have to live with a God who's that cruel. But you can't live with that God because he's too powerful. So you have to kill him. You get what I'm trying to say? In other words, if you say that God exists, who's cruel, that God who's cruel exists, you must also accept that cruel God is also powerful. If you allow him to exist, he will force you to align your life to him, and if you don't, you're going to be in trouble. So for you to be able to live your life in this universe, or where there's suffering, then that God must be done away with. You have to kill that God. You have to do away with that God. But as we know, the interesting thing, and I can read all of these things, but as we know, the interesting thing is, after Darwin lost the child, and then he didn't believe in God or whatever, but the child remained lost, dead. If God is responsible for the death of my father, and then I do away with God, then there should be no more death after that, because I've dealt with the cause. Okay, just give me 1 second. I'm going to give you a chance just now. Just hold on. If God is the cause, if I remove God because I'm suffering, there must be a causal link between my suffering and God. Or else, why do I remove a person who did not cause my death? What's the point? Why remove him? So if I remove him, it's because there's a causal link. Now, to actually test whether removal has been effective, then there must be no death after I've removed him. Maybe that is thinking too far. But at least what we know you are doing when you are removing God, you are removing one explanation for the death. You are not removing the cause, you are removing the explanation. Then the question that we have is, what are you left in your arsenal of explanations for this? And then what you are left with normally is, life has no meaning, it has no purpose. We are here like animals, we're here now, we're gone tomorrow, we die, we don't die, it makes no difference. If that's the case, why are you sad? Why are you hurt when you die if life is meant to be like that? You see, if life is meant to be like that, so naturally we should be geared and adjusted naturally to that kind of life. Why are we finding this life strange? If death is what's supposed to be, a fish does not seek to analyze how it lives in the water. It's its environment. It lives there. It's not shocked. If our environment is to swim in the pool of death, why are we finding it strange if we were born in that pool? Why is a fish that swims in the water having a problem with water? Why are we having a problem with death if death is what it is? It has always been happening through evolution, death and decay, the survival of the fittest. Why is that worrying us? You see, the reason why there's religion, rightly or wrongly, it is to deal with that worry. It is to deal with that concern. The reason why there are philosophical explanations, it is to deal with that. But when you remove these, but you are still stuck with this, why are you not able to just naturally be adjusted to this environment? Why is it foreign? Why is death foreign? Okay, go ahead, bro.
Okay, going back to that, what you just mentioned earlier on about depression. I know some people, even celebrities, who committed suicide as a result of depression, to such an extent that one can doubt God's existence. So if that mindset lingers like in your mind, how do you deal with that? If you question God's existence, how do you deal with that?
You can question even your existence. This thing of questioning existence is not limited to questioning God's existence. People go to a point of questioning even their own existence and say, do I exist? I'm serious. Do I exist? How do I know I exist? Have you ever felt like that? How do I know I exist? Do people exist? Are these people here? Do they exist? You're talking about God you cannot see. When this thing is serious, you begin to doubt what you see. You see, here's the thing about thinking in that direction. We need to affirm first that this, what I see, is there. We have to affirm that. We must at least believe that what I see is there. This is not a projection of my mind. What I see is there. And then once you can do that, then you can do some serious thinking now. Where does it come from and things like that. Then I say God created. You see, I can bring God because there is creation. Then we can bring God. But if you doubt creation and then he's the creator of something you also doubt, you are lost. I mean, in the maze of confusion. We have right to ask if God exists. I have no problem with that. I have no problem with the asking. I'm challenged with some of the answers we give, because some of the answers are not thought through. That's how I feel. I'm critiquing the answers, but I'm not condemning the questioning. If we have a God who loves and a God who's all-powerful and my child dies, I have to ask the question, where was God? Because he's all-powerful, he could have prevented that. He's all-love, he could have prevented it. Why didn't he prevent it? And then Paul says, be immovable, because resurrection has an answer for that question, which I'm going to look at right now. So resurrection must answer. Yes, my argument is that question of God's existence in the light of pain and moral evil and suffering. Resurrection, we shouldn't say those questions are irrelevant when people are asking those existential questions. And then, how is your faith in the sanctuary and the 1844? How is it answering to that? That's my point. But I'm saying, I'm going to look at resurrection and respond to that question. Are you with me? So that's the whole thing here that I'm trying to do. So I'm first of all dealing with all that surrounds us. And then I'm going to ask the question now. Now that I've lost my child, now that my daughter was raped, now that my mother was mugged and killed, and God, I want justice, in other words. And I want to know why. What happened in a moral universe. Okay? So I'm going to look at resurrection from that point. But my point was, when you are removing God, you're not removing the cause. You are removing one of the explanations for the effect. Is that clear, beloved? Does that make sense? Is there somebody who doesn't understand that? Because that can also help me in my thinking. And I'm saying, when you remove God, you're not removing the cause. In my mind, at least, you're not removing the cause. You're removing one of the explanations for what you see, for the effect. In other words, I refuse to accept a God who exists, and yet I'm going through this suffering. So that God does not exist. I mean, if you listen to Dawkins and his friends, the new atheists, they really believe that God does not exist. They've made it their life to go around telling people that God does. But I have a problem with you spending your money talking about a God does not exist. Really have an issue. I will never spend my time teaching people about someone who does not exist. And I don't have time to be angry at a person who does not exist. And giving evidence why he must not exist. And write books, serious books on why he does not exist. That to me is very, very, very interesting. Do you think I can go around telling everyone that Otokoloshe don't exist? Okay, there was a hand there.
For example, I just lost my sister because of breast cancer, right? Now, yes, I'm going through that depression and the question why, but I'm not questioning why. Because the reason why I'm questioning why did she do this way, why did she do this so that she can be healed? But now I'm a little bit confused, whereby you say if you remove God, you're not removing the problem.
Now you are really confused. Now let me help you. I'm not saying you shouldn't say why. I'm saying when you answer your why and you say, let me remove God. I'm saying when you remove God, I'm not saying don't remove him for that matter. I'm just trying to explain what you have just done. When you remove God, you are not removing the cause of the cancer. You're removing the explanation for the cancer. You are saying, I don't expect God as an explanation of this. I'm not talking to a person who is a Christian is asking why, what happened. I'm not dealing with that. I'm talking about a person who on a philosophical level is asking questions that have to do with God's existence to a point where he removes God because he cannot align his thinking with this God who's supposed to be loving and such things are happening. I've moved beyond your issue. Your issue is simple. It's like, why is my sister having cancer? Why did he do this? Yours is simple. It can be answered by doctors and other people. But I'm moving to a philosophical one where you must answer that and say, why God? Why all of this? Why? And then you say, because I cannot answer this why, then I'm dealing away with you. I'm saying you're dealing with the explanation because you're asking the whys. So when you remove God, you're not removing the cause. Because if you're removing the cause, then you would never suffer from that again. That's my point. Are you still confused? No. But you will see when we link this to creation. What I'm trying to say, I don't know, I've been saying this now, trying to say, but that's the point. There's another way of looking at it. The German woman who witnessed the genocide in Namibia when the Germans killed everyone in church and they invited people to come and pray in church and they opened fire. And she narrates the experience because she survived. And she says, after that experience, when I pray, I don't close my eyes. But somebody would say, after that experience, I never pray again. Because how do I pray to a God who could not protect us in his church when we're mowed down? So I will never pray. That's a response. But there's another one who says, me, I've learned something. I'll never close my eyes. So he says the issue was not that we were praying, the issue was that we had closed our eyes. If we had not closed our eyes, continued praying, we would have seen the guns and we would have run away. So from now on, I open my eyes as I pray to God. When I see you doing something, then I deal with that. Because I'm praying and I'm opening my eyes. So those who are talking about the land, from now on, I'm not going to close my eyes. I'll pray to God and open my eyes so that I can see you taking my land. Do you see? So the issue now is no longer God. The issue is how do I approach God? Are you with me? How do I approach? Which is a different issue altogether. And it forced Busak and others to write the book. Instead of saying farewell to God, they said farewell to innocence. So that's the difference. God is still there, but farewell to innocence. Now we're going to critique, now we're going to argue, now we're going to read the Bible ourselves to get the answer. Hence I say, let's look at resurrection as one way of saying resurrection. Resurrection is radical, it addresses all these questions. But we may still not accept it, but at least give it a chance to do that. All right? And, I wasn't hoping to talk so much. Let me just I've got to read this. This comes from Thomas Nagel, is a professor of philosophy at New York University. I've got to read this. He says, I want atheism. It's just the same as Huxley, where he wanted meaninglessness to actually exist for a motive, for a reason. He says, I want atheism to be true. And I am made uneasy by the fact that there are some of the most and well-informed people I know who are religious believers. Some of my colleague scientists, some of my colleague philosophers are religious. And it makes me uneasy because I want this thing to be true, that God does not exist. So now they make me to doubt that because they are also intelligent as I am. That's why you'll be surprised to see on the stage, you'll see Darwin from Princeton, not from Princeton, from Oxford. And then this other guy, what's his name, also from Oxford, also from the Department of Science. They're both professors and scientists. Other one believes in God, other one doesn't. It makes you not right. We've studied the same books, but why do you believe in God and I don't? It makes you uneasy. So he says, it isn't that I don't believe in God. That's not the issue. And of course that there is no God, that's not the issue. He says, my issue is this one. I don't want there to be God. It's not the issue of my belief. That I don't believe in there's no God, that's fine. I don't want there to be God. In other words, even if God is there and you show me, I will say, please don't be there. I don't want God to be there. I don't want a universe that has God in it. I don't want to answer to God. I want to be free. Very, very, very interesting. Now, let me help you. Let me not help you. Let's work on resurrection. We can take the whole week. By the way, we're going to be having a key meeting running around this concept of resurrection. But it's also short because I think I'm preaching 3 or 4 times. But I'm going to have 2 weeks and I'm going to be developing this whole idea on resurrection for the next. It's going to be amazing. I don't know also what I'm going to discover, but it's going to be amazing. Every day just working on that and other issues as well, of course. Here is what we find in the book 1 Corinthians 15 about resurrection, which is beautiful. I'm not going to be able to quote text and verses but it's all from verse 12. First of all, what Paul does in 1 Corinthians 15, he establishes the resurrection as a scientific fact. At least the resurrection of Christ. He says, I'm going to prove historically that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. Because we can't talk about something we don't agree on. He says, I'm going to prove beyond a doubt. This is how we prove things that have happened in history. There's a scientific way of establishing that. He says, I'm going to establish that right now so that we are clear that Jesus Christ did rise from the dead. By the way, we have discovered now, with all the discoveries of manuscripts and many other things, we are discovering now that there are very few skeptics, very few. Those that are still remaining is for political reasons. There are very few skeptics now who don't accept that Christ resurrected from the dead. They may not accept what it means, but it's difficult to deny that with evidence that we have. You see, Christ, the Bible could not talk about resurrection, which is a miracle, and not be able to substantiate and give us tools to verify that. The issue is not that there are no miracles. The issue is how can we verify that it's a miracle? Here's the problem. If you go to these healing sessions and they heal you, people say, no, but that's not a miracle. People say, but that's not a miracle. Others doubt, others say it's a miracle. One of the reasons why we doubt is because we have no way of verifying it. We don't know whether that was true that you were not walking, because we're not staying next door. So if you are a next door neighbor and I know you've always been in a wheelchair and I see you there on a TV and you are walking and you come back and stay with us for the next 3 months you're walking, then I have verified that miracle. The thing is, all the people that are happening there, I don't know all of them. I've never seen all of them. I don't even know that they were not walking before they start walking. So I can't verify that. So for me, boom, I leave it like that. Are you with me? So the issue is not miracles. The issue is, how can I verify that? And verification must be something that is done scientifically. It must be evident. It must be evidence-based. It can't just be verification, because so-and-so says so. It must be verified. And here the issue about miracles, and especially the resurrection of Christ, is that it could be verified. Now, we're not going to waste time. We're not going to do with that. Maybe another time we can do that. But from the first part, Paul, from verse 1 to verse 11, wants to establish that. And from verse 12, then he works on the implication, what it means now for Christ to have resurrected. Because then he says, if Christ resurrected, how can you argue and say there will be no resurrection of people? You see, then if there is no resurrection of believers, then you have to argue and say there's no resurrection of Christ. But you can't say that because I've already proved to you that he did resurrect. So he bases his argument for the resurrection of followers of Christ on the fact that he himself resurrected. You see, if we follow a person who resurrected, why would we not resurrect if we are following that person who resurrected? Now for Paul, his argument is basically that I declare to you, he says in verse 1, the gospel which I preached to you, which also received and in which you stand, by which you also are saved if you hold fast. He says, for I delivered to you first of all that which I have received, that Christ died for our sins according to Scripture. He was buried, that he rose again. So all you have to do to verify is, one, that Christ existed. That's the first thing you need to do. You need to show that Christ exists, and there's enough evidence that he existed. So it's not a myth, it's not a figment of our imagination. It's a historical figure. There are more manuscripts, there are more records for the existence of Christ than you have for Julius Caesar. So Christ is, in terms of verifying historically, you've got more for him than you have for Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar also lived around the same period and is mentioned, but there's more evidence for Christ than you have for Julius Caesar. That's why you even have 7 centuries later, the religion Muslim come, and Muslims are not basically Christians, but they have no problem with the existence of Christ. But even those, Christ is not just produced by Christians, even those who are not Christians. Actually, you go to the Jews, they'll tell you, you go to Jerusalem now, they don't dispute the fact that Christ died, that he was here, but they dispute that he was the Messiah. So his historicity, there was a time when that was argued, but it's no longer argued in theology that Christ was a historical figure. So Paul says that he died, but for you to prove that he died, you must first prove that he lived. And then the second thing you must do is to prove that he died. Jews all believe that Christ died, but they don't believe he resurrected. That's another story. They say the body was stolen, but they believe that he died. The Muslims believe that he didn't die, because if he died, then they'll be forced with the resurrection. And if he resurrected, then there's no place for Muhammad, because Muhammad did not resurrect. So Christ was taken to heaven as far as they are concerned. But the Christians believe that he died. Then you have to go and prove that he died. Now, it's not difficult to prove that he died. It's difficult to prove that he did not die. That one is difficult. Because what the Muslims are saying is difficult to prove. What are you going to prove that he did not die? It's going to be very difficult. But you can prove that he died. Because there was the tomb. He was buried in that tomb. You can even indicate when he died. You can look into history. Enough evidence he died. But you must not only prove that he died. If you're going to prove that he resurrected, you must also prove that he was buried. You see, people who resurrect must die and be buried. They must not just die. Because if you die and we don't know where you are and then you are resurrected, how do we know you are the one who was buried? So we must have you dead and we must have you buried in a tomb. So that when you are resurrected, we can check in that tomb. If you are not dead, then we know you're resurrected. But not only must the tomb be empty, but you must be seen walking. So the empty tomb is not an evidence. The empty tomb is an evidence if we see you walking. So if you were at my funeral and you saw me being buried, okay? Now you see me in observatory. You run to the tomb, you find that thing is open, there's no one. Then we have to add 2 and 2. But if you go there and you still find the coffin with the person, and I'm walking, then say, hi. That's something else. I mustn't have the dead body and a live person of the dead body. That is why it was very easy during the time of Christ. If Christ is said to be risen, all you have to do is produce a body to debunk that. Produce a body. Now I watched this film and this documentary. All they were doing there, they were trying to get that body. Because remember, Christ, it was not long, man. You could actually get to see the tomb. If he was stolen, you could look around and get traitors and use your intelligence people to look around, and you'll actually get to the body, and you will see the body with all this was the body. It was hidden somewhere. They looked for the body because that was the only way you can counter. That was the only way you can say this is a lie, is to produce a body. If the body has been stolen, produce it. But beloved, you made this thing difficult for yourself because you put in soldiers there. You actually sealed the tomb. How are the disciples who are afraid? How are they going to be able to roll the tomb, take out the body without the soldiers? You made it difficult for you. Because if you didn't put all those soldiers, then you can say, but you can't say that because your soldiers were there. Actually, it was your soldiers who said he's risen. Because they saw him. It was after they were both that they said, no, we saw him rising, but we were sleeping. Now, you can't use that as an argument. You can't say I was sleeping, but I saw him. And I couldn't do anything because I was sleeping. That is not admissible. You cannot be a witness of something we have seen while you were sleeping. Because sleeping in itself is an argument that you don't know what's happening. But you can't have almost a whole batch of soldiers sleeping unless they've drunk all medicine or Panado. You don't sleep as a Roman soldier because you sleep, you die. You sleep, that's your death. But how come all of you are sleeping? And these poor little soldiers, disciples who were afraid even on Friday, on Sunday they've got the guts to be there early to steal the body. To make it even worse, how can you steal a body, hide it, come back and say he's risen, and then you are willing to die for that? Who is willing to die for a fabrication that he himself has made? How do you die for your own self-made fabrication? How do you say you can kill me, I'll be resurrected, when you know that Christ did not resurrect? Why are you staging something and you use it as an injection to life and the meaning of life when you know it did not happen? No, they were hallucinating. How come that 500 people, and Paul mentions it, he says Christ was seen by more than 500. He's bringing witnesses. He says some of these 500 are still alive now. You can go ask them. How do you summon 500 within a short space of time and then say, let's all agree that Christ resurrected? 500 different witnesses. They've all seen him at different times, the disciples, even those who doubted. I mean, Thomas did not believe Christ is risen. How can you say he was hallucinated? How can you be hallucinated when you say, I don't believe? And then you have to test for yourself, and this, now I believe. And then you still call that hallucination. In fact, those who have done hallucination, whatever, theories and stuff, how do you have 500 people all saying the same thing if it is not true? But the one who's hallucinating is the one who's not seeing that. If all of you say this is Papu wearing a bow tie, and then one person walks in and says, that's a lie. Then who's hallucinating here? It's the one, not all of us. You cannot, even if you drink the same hallucinogen, you cannot all see the same thing. Even worse, if you're hallucinating, you cannot hallucinate to a point where you create projections that don't exist in your natural framework. These people never believed that Christ would rise. How can they now, when they hallucinate, start believing that? Because they never believed it. That those of us, not me, those who have smoked dacha, smoked benzene, they see a lion. They don't see something they've never seen before. They see a lion and they see something that they know is dangerous. Was their mind know that the lion is dangerous? They say, hey, this thing is coming to me, chance. But they see things they know that dangerous. They don't just see angels. I'm seeing an angel coming to me. They don't believe in angels, but they see the things they believe in. So if you're hallucinating, you're going to hallucinate around the framework of your beliefs. Am I making sense here? Now, those theories have been kicked out of the door. They won't even stand in any court of law. But let's leave that. What Paul is saying is that there is a resurrection. Christ resurrected. Then he says, based on that, we're all going to be resurrected. Here are the implications of resurrection. I'm not going to have enough time. I'm just going to jump around and just give you the main thought. Here are the implications of resurrection. I'm not going to put it in that order. The first one is that enemy is, death is an enemy. He says that in 1 Corinthians 15:26, that the last enemy that's going to be destroyed is death. Resurrection. Right there, you are agreed. Right there, there's a common ground that the death of your son, as far as God is concerned, is bad. So God agrees with you, it's bad. God is not celebrating. You see, when God says there's resurrection, by making resurrection a project, God is already declaring death as an enemy. Because resurrection is a reversal of death. So resurrection cannot coexist with death. So resurrection is an annihilation of death. By resurrecting and destroying death, so the fact that there's resurrection means that death is not right. If death was fine with God, then it would be an end. But the very fact God does not allow death to be the end, it means God has a problem with death. That's why we talk about resurrection. And then you can go to the life of Christ, where he raised Lazarus from dead. When everybody thought he's dead, he rose him from the dead. Why did he do that? It is because Christ himself is opposed to death. That's why he raises him. You can't act against yourself. If death is your modus operandi, how do you resurrect people? Because then resurrection is acting against that. So when the Mary and Martha says, if you were here, our brother Lazarus would not have died, they are basically saying that Christ is opposed to death. When he is there, death does not come. So already in your theory of why has my child died, you can use this to comfort you that God is not complicit, that God has no part in this. He hates it to the extent that he has created a system, he has created a solution to solve this thing. I'm not saying your questions end, but at least you have direction. That I'm serving a God who has a problem with death as well. Just like I have a problem with death, God has a problem with death as well. How do I know? When Christ was here, he was representing God. He fed the poor, the hungry, so that they would not die. And those who died, he made sure that they are resurrected. Now here's a problem that is facing the world. Now you've got dead people going to heaven. It's even worse. Now you have a child who was raped. Now he's depressed. Now she's dead. Now she's in heaven. You've got to pick up all these things and put them in the set that makes people to go to heaven. So rape and depression must be right, because in the end they take you to a right place. Yes. You see, now the world is stuck in their own theology. Our own theology is killing us. You've got heaven as the reward for the saints. You've got rape and depression, and then people is dead, and a person is dead. Then you are forced to say, this person is in heaven, is enjoying himself in heaven. Then if that's the case, then depression cannot be wrong, because depression has made this person to be in a better place than she was in when she was here on earth. Now, let me say that again. If depression takes you to heaven, and heaven is a better place than this earth, then depression cannot be wrong, because depression has served like a religious Uber that takes you to a better place. Face me, help me here, beloved. Am I thinking on a tangent here? Listen here. If death makes me go to a better country, a better place that's better than this one, then death cannot be a bad thing. It's like I'm losing my mind. You guys are just like, hey, go ahead. It's like, what are you talking about? Who's going to die here? Now that is why I must say, beloved, that is why I must say, I am so angry at the idea that dead people go to heaven. So angry. Because it just destroys everything. I am so angry. It is one of my pet projects. Whenever I've got time to tell people, whoever they are, that don't associate death with God, because God hates death, even if you love it. And he says in 1 Corinthians, I'm going to destroy death. All right? The second thing that comes out of 1 Corinthians 15 is that there is more to life than just eating and drinking. John 10:10, Christ says, I've come that you might have life and have it abundantly. So Christ wants us to live here on earth. That's why when Lazarus was resurrected, he came back here to earth. Life on earth is better than death, because you're not going anywhere when you're dead. But more than that, what we find here is that He says if there's no resurrection, then let's eat and drink and marry, for tomorrow we die. But he says no, there is resurrection, so we can't eat and drink and be merry, because tomorrow will be resurrected if we die. So what happens is resurrection injects meaning into life. So life is not just a merry-round and merry-bound, whatever, just a round robin, round thing that has no meaning. No. Life is not just about eating. That is why corruption thrives in an environment where there's no belief in resurrection. People who are corrupt don't think that there's life. They want to eat as much as they can because they are dead tomorrow. But if you know that there's life tomorrow, you'll still answer for how you ate in this life. Resurrection says what you do is very important, to a point that we're going to resurrect you to answer for it. I'm going to use suicide as a lay person. I know it can be more complex. If I were to want to end my life, and then in the process of trying to do that, I get to understand that you're going to be resurrected. Do you know that can make me think twice? It's like you're killing yourself now, you're going to be resurrected. It's not the end. They'll resurrect you and ask you, why did you kill yourself? So you're going to be resurrected. So you better make sure you have an answer. That will just inject life into you and say, what can I learn from this bad event that has happened to me? That's one. That's the second one. In that life has meaning in spite of all this. And then I'm going to end with the one that may answer some of the questions. The third one is that we are held accountable for our actions. We are held accountable for our actions. There he says, stop sinning. It is those people who rape others, they are held accountable. Now let me tell you something, beloved. If you walk into that room there, in that door there, and you shoot all of us dead, and you get arrested, and you are given 3 life sentences or 105 life sentences, then we say justice has been done. What does that mean? I've lost myself. My wife is without a wife, my kids without a father, my mother without a child, my friends without a friend. And then the person who killed me is in prison for 3 life sentences or whatever. Where is justice there? What is justice? I mean, honestly, what is justice? I'm dead. The guys have 5 life sentences. Where is justice? That's my question. There's no justice there. It's worse when the person walks in and kills you and kills himself. You can't even take him to prison. He's dead. It's like the guy will not even stand trial. He's dead. That's the end. It ends there. But wait. The resurrection says, no, we're going to resurrect all those people who killed, and we're going to resurrect you. And then we'll put you, and then we'll answer why you killed them. I like that.